All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first Mark Brower, Todd Ortscheid PM debate cast here on,
Oh,
what's
we're
that?
debating.
Well, or discussing, whatever we want to call it today. My last one that I did, the first one I did of these, one of these live streams was with Sam Edinger, and we were
Oh
both.
yeah, Sam.
But yeah, we can just do a discussion here. We can do it either way. But
No, I'm sure it'll devolve into a debate for sure. I'm looking forward to it actually. Um,
excellent.
Nice cinematic intro, dude. Like
Okay.
boom. Yeah.
I
How did
got
you
that for like $20 on Fiverr. I think I put that
Ivor?
together.
Nice.
Yep.
Okay.
Love me
Exploiting
some
overseas
Fiverr.
labor to get your cinematic.
Hey, that probably bought him like a week of food. What the hell?
Hey, that's rude. That's disrespectful.
Oh, well, welcome everybody. Mark and I will actually both be at Southern States here coming up tomorrow. I am driving over. I should be getting in tomorrow afternoon, and I know Mark's heading out too. So hopefully, I'll be seeing some people there.
Let's go. 1
What's
o'clock. My flight leaves.
Oh, nice. And you should be getting in right around the same time we do, I think, maybe a little bit later. But for those who don't know you, Mark, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I can do the same for your viewers.
Certainly. My name is Mark Brower. I own a residential property management company in the Phoenix, Arizona market. I am the broker, CEO, and we've been around for 14 years. We have just under 500 clients with just under 600 doors. I've actually lost net 30 doors over the last year and a half. I'm sort of bummed about that. But yeah, super high or super low door to client ratio. And yeah, just trying to figure it out. I'm not content at my current size. I want to grow. So sort of confessing my own incompetence is limiting the growth because I want to grow and I'm not growing. Just putting that out there. I'd love to solve that problem. But yeah, otherwise just trying to run a high integrity, visionary, purpose-driven property management company.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. For people on Mark's feed who aren't familiar with me, my name's Todd Ortscheid. I've got a property management company in Atlanta, so the other side of the country from Mark. We were managing up to about 1,100 doors at one point. I sold off our Florida operation, our HOA unit. We manage about 250 doors today after we've downsized. But we're back in growth mode because I just go through these phases. Sometimes I decide to shrink it. Sometimes I decide to grow it, and I'm back in growth mode at this point. But also do some consulting work, and I'm sure some of you are seeing this on my Substack, where we also have a newsletter. But yeah, definitely glad to be here. Always happy to talk to Mark. We rarely agree on a lot of things, so it's always an interesting conversation. So looking forward to it. Is there anything you wanted to start off with, Mark, or I can start off with something? What's your
Why don't you? Nothing like super heavy on my mind. So why don't you kick us off? And I'm sure the conversation will weave around.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just go into what you started off with there with the topic of what I call portfolio concentration. I think is a good one because you just mentioned that you don't have enough owners, you feel like, for the number of doors you're managing. What was the number of clients it was? Remind me.
Well, I think we're around 1.2. Each owner has about 1.2 properties, and I'm of the impression that makes the property management company more valuable. That's not my impression, that's my opinion, because you've got a more diversified client base.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, I must have misheard. I thought you said you didn't have enough clients, but yeah, I mean, that is, I think, for a lot of people out there who aren't familiar with this, people who are doing acquisitions, like Mark mentioned there, if you've got, perfect example, I was trying to acquire a company in Atlanta. This is a few years ago. And when I ran the numbers after I got into due diligence, I think it was something like 3 owners comprised 75% of the doors in this portfolio, and it was something like 500 or 600 doors. It was similar to Mark's company.
No bueno.
That's exactly what I said. I turned him down. I mean, it was just, there was no way for me to make those numbers work. You can't make a clawback that works for that. But I mean, it sounds like you're probably dealing then probably primarily with accidental landlords if you're at 1.2, right? Is that your main customer?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Do you like that, or are you looking to get more investor focused? Because I know you've been talking a lot about asset management.
No,
as
I,
opposed
I
to-
like I like accidental owners that are look, I don't care if you're an accidental owner or if you're an investor, but I require a high level of support from the owner in the relationship and for the property condition. And the longer I'm in business, the higher that bar raises, and the higher that bar raises, the happier my team is, and the more value we can add, the more consistent we can be with our operations.
Excellent. We're actually starting off with some points of agreement there. And very similar, by the way. I think we're at 1.1 or 1.2 also on our doors per owner. I like it, to be honest with you, because if we lose a door, it's a non-event for me. I know that the BDM is going to have that door replaced in 2 or 3 days, and it does not matter to me.
Yeah.
Whereas we've had bigger clients. I mean, we used to do some institutional back in the day. I mean, this is going back to after the global financial crisis, where we were doing some work with some REITs, and they would just pull massive amounts of doors all at once. I mean, you just show up to work on Monday and you've got a message from them. Oh, 60 doors, we decided to sell them. So, it's just all of a sudden gone. And that's an employee right there. I mean, that's somebody's salary, basically. You've got an extra employee that you no longer need when that sort of thing happens. It's difficult for the business. So I much prefer this. I know some people love to deal with intentional investors with lots of doors. It is not for me personally.
No, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. Hey, I know something we can talk about. I don't know if I'm pivoting too quickly.
Go for it.
You and I probably also agree about this one. Churn is a massive cost to residential property management companies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did you saw my post on LinkedIn from a day or two ago, where I highlight? Let me give you some stats.
Sure.
Or some figures rather, and then you can disagree or acknowledge if you think this is right. If you are a property management company adding 10 units per month on average, and if you have a 20% churn rate, you plateau at 600 units under management. It's simple math.
That's probably right. I haven't run the numbers on those specific ones, but that sounds about right.
Here's the base. The math is so easy. Here you go. 10 units a month times 60 months. Because 20% churn means the average the average unit stays 5 years. 5 years times 12, 60, 10 times 60, that's your plateau. That's the easy back of the napkin math. Okay, if your churn drops to 10%, you have a 1,200 unit property management company. Yeah. And you and I both have a respect for Mark Cunningham. And if you've listened to Mark Cunningham, you know that his churn is about 10% or maybe slightly less than that.
Yeah, I think he's actually, if I remember right, I think he was running 7 or 8% last year.
Crazy. So all you have to do, so that tells me that Mark Cunningham, unless there's something I'm missing here, averages adding 7 to 8 units a month and runs a 1,200 unit plus PM company. He's also been around for over 47 years and he's learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah, theirs is actually really interesting because I was just at the Rentvine conference where Mark was speaking, and he actually put a chart up on the PowerPoint when he was doing his presentation. Their growth has been remarkably consistent for a long period of time. When you look, I know Peter Lohman is someone who's put out his growth numbers where it's these big spikes.
Yeah.
Got these valleys, and Mark's has just been this steady growth, which has been, it's very rare to see that from anybody in the industry. And he's done a fantastic job, and it's all on, by the way, a 1% marketing budget, which is what's amazing. It's all content marketing, it's all reputation. That's all it is, which is, you got to focus on that stuff. There's no
man. If you could just get really good at selecting the clients not to bring on, it just solves so many problems. But let's drill down a little bit more on this churn issue. So here's some more numbers I ran. If you can move the needle So I just gave, like a stat where, you're double the size without changing anything about your unit acquisition strategy. You're just at 10 units, massive difference if your churn drops. Here's a smaller, and I said like a 10 point from 20 to 10. Here's a smaller change in the impact on profitability and revenue. Ready for this? If you can move from 11% churn to 10% churn, 1 point, it represents, and you're adding 10 units a month, it represents a 330,000 annual revenue shift for the business, which at scale, if you're at that scale, that should mean $100,000 in profit. 1% difference in churn. That's astonishing. That's like really relevant to the business that we're in, because for those of us, I'm including myself in this category, for those of us who have been a little cavalier about churn and been like you said it just a moment ago, like, well, it's a non-event if I lose a client. Okay. And maybe we can dive into the fact that there's good churn and bad churn, right? But if we get a little bit better at understanding and meeting the client's psychographic needs, and we drop our churn 1%, and we make $100,000, the owner, the proprietor of that business makes $100,000 more in profit each year, is that worth investing in? My argument is yes, that is worth investing in. And so then the follow-up question is, what kinds of things drop churn? And Peter Lohman, you and I both read Peter Lohman. He's been very intentional for the last year and a half, focusing on churn and dropping that churn number. Smart operators know this is a really powerful way to move the needle.
Yeah, it is. And this actually came in from Ray on what's reasonable churn versus what should be the target. And to answer that, Ray, they're traditionally
Ray's watching. I love Ray.
Watching. Ray's great.
Ray, are you driving White Lightning right now?
So just so people know these numbers, the industry average churn is 20%. So you can see this if you're an ARPA member, which I recommend. You can pull this up in the NARPM benchmarking report. 20% is the standard. What do you have? Liquid Death.
I'm drinking Liquid Death, bro.
Here I am with my orange soda. I'm very, very healthy here.
Liquid Death's the bomb.
So yeah, 20% is standard. If you look at what the top performers are doing right now, it's 10% or about just under 10.
Fantastic.
So, and it is very difficult to do. My company hovers right around 18, 20. We're right about average. And a lot of companies
I'm there too.
Is that roughly where you are?
Yeah, I'm right there too. Yep.
I know I've talked to Matt Whitaker, who's over at Evernest. Their numbers have been hovering right around 2025, and they're doing acquisitions. So it's roughly.
Somebody told me a lot higher than that.
Well, I think the higher part is on their the first year of the acquisition, not the ongoing stuff. But I mean, that's pretty common. So I mean, honestly, what we'd like to do, like Mark pointed out, if you go from 20 to 10, you're effectively doubling what you do.
It's like lights out, game changer, smartest thing you could ever do. Like, I mean, okay, the inordinate amount of focus and resource expenditure on the acquisition of new doors over addressing churn. I think there's a misalignment, there's a misperception, there's a misunderstanding, or what am I looking for? Misallocation of resources. I think if we understand churn and how impactful it is on our business, I want to shift now and I want to talk about good churn and bad churn, because so I think you already know this about me, Todd. I came from a position of, I feel very strongly about own the outcome, extreme ownership, like not going to manipulate my online reviews, like all this stuff. Like, by the way, an argument in favor of not manipulating your online, Peter Lohman once told me, game on, Google. You're going to play the game, I'm going to play the game.
I like that.
So, uh, my brain just works this way. Do you know the Kanban, just-in-time, lean manufacturing? You know that system? You've ever heard about that?
I'm only vaguely familiar with it.
Okay.
I haven't read all the
Okay,
details.
I'm not an expert. I'm not going to try to pretend to be an expert. But what's really cool about something that has a linear progression through production, if you're using lean manufacturing or the Kanban system of just-in-time inventory, what's really cool about that is the problems become visually apparent. When you don't have stockpiles of materials in front of every workstation, if you see a workstation dormant, or you do see a pile up beforehand, you know immediately where your problem is in your system. Okay. So I kind of think of online reputation as something similar. If we're just going to go all in and manipulate reviews, we're really kind of losing that opportunity to see where the problems are. Anyway, I digress. Back to, and I know we disagree about that, but back to the idea of good churn versus bad churn. I intentionally designed my business so that I had a very broad base of clients, very low unit to client ratio, because in my early days, back in the post foreclosure, like the foreclosure bubble burst days, I'd had 83 properties given to me one day by Carrington Property Services. I don't know if you know that name.
I worked with them. Yeah, back in the day. Yeah.
83 units, and within 8 months, all gone. I also had one client that had 43 properties, former home builder, terrible reputation in town, and they were just really punitive, abusive. They were the slumlording with tenants and just like taking tenants all of their security deposit every time, and saying just come fight me, let's duke it out. Like, they once told me that they were a small private home builder. They said, we build houses so that we can finance our lawsuits. That's what they said to me. So that was a client, and no surprise there. Within 6 months, they were gone. And I look back, and the time that was stolen from me, or that I allowed to be, that I allowed to go to those clients, actually slowed down the building of my business, the perfecting of my offering, the resources for quality service for people who deserved it. And so I'm never going back there. I'm not doing it. Period. And sometimes, you and I both know this, owners do not have the proper emotional or intellectual makeup. I don't want to be. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but investing in rental properties is not for everyone. And the quicker we can figure out whether they're going to give me the level of support I need, the better. And let's gracefully exit anything that's not a clear win for me. And if that's 20, so how much of that, what I would consider healthy thinking, right? How much of that affects churn versus, there's multiple factors. It's, am I letting the wrong clients in the first place? Am I too readily letting go clients that could be good clients, but I'm just, I'm giving up too soon? There's different factors here. Can we break that down?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets down part of this to the old Pareto principle, which, I mean, the first time I dealt with it was when I was a union rep. And I remember I was going in talking to the chief pilot, and he told me, you know what, I spend 80% of my time dealing with 20% of your damn pilots. What's wrong with these guys? Can't you get them in line? And it's the same thing just about in anything you do. It's in property management, 80% of your time is dealing with 20% of the tenants or 20% of the owners. And that is good churn if you can get rid of those. That's why I'm always, and I posted about this on LinkedIn, I think a week or two ago, that I don't worry about that kind of churn. I do worry about trying to prevent the onboarding of them, but there's only so much you can do there. I think sometimes property managers get so laser focused on trying to weed them out on the front end when some of that's just not possible. Some people, their personality types are just, they're going to make it seem like they're very reasonable. They're going to be very supportive. They're going to be very trusting. But then that first big repair bill that comes in, they lose their mind. And there's just no way to predict that. There's just none that I've found and none that I've heard anybody else present. So my feeling is, yeah, churn, I want to keep it as low as possible within reason, but there's some amount of churn that I like because I want to get rid of that 20% of the bad owners. And that's going to make my operation more profitable. That's going to make us more efficient, and everybody's just going to be happier at their job. So I don't worry about that kind of churn.
Yeah, well, then how do you bifurcate that good churn from the bad churn? And is this just like some kind of a vanity metric that we think that we can move from, like the illustration I gave? Like, it seems like a really good thing to move from 11 to 10% churn, but not if you have to sell your soul for it, or not if you like hijack the rest of your business, or you lose your best employees. Like, there's all these qualifiers to that.
Well, that's why I think these benchmarks are so important, because it kind of gives you information on where everybody else is. So, if I'm already at, say, 11%, do I really have a lot of room to be able to improve that? I mean, it's possible, but probably not. When I'm looking at the benchmark data and it tells me that the top 25% of property managers are doing 10%, I might devote a whole lot of time to trying to get from 11 to 10, and it's just not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze at that point. Now, if I'm at 25% and the best operators in the industry are doing 10, it's probably worth my while to devote a lot of resources towards solving that problem. But you got to figure out, where's the best use of my time? Where's the best use of my resources? Is that really where it is if I'm that close to the goal? And, a lot of times I don't think it is. And you also have to look at this on a market basis. There are some markets that are just higher churn than others. And that you have to factor in also. You have to look at this as, am I in a market where it's predominantly accidental landlords, and the first opportunity they have to sell, they're going to sell? If so, I have to factor that into my churn predictions and what I think is reasonable. Or am I in a market where I'm dealing primarily with intentional investors? And if that's the case, that's where you're probably going to want to devote more resources to reducing that churn as much as possible, because number one owner leaving is probably going to be a lot of doors, because it's an intentional investor. So that one owner could be 5% of your business all at once gone. So, there's lots of things you have to factor in there. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer on it.
Okay, I have some thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we get to some disagreement soon. Okay, so what causes churn? You said that some markets are more conducive to churn because maybe they're a bunch of accidental landlords and they want to get out as soon as they can and they just sell. I'm going to say that there is no better outcome for a property manager. Well, let me first state this. I think that, and this is kind of a maybe, don't take this as judgy if anybody's listening. It's not my intent. If you don't have a transaction brokerage in connection to your residential property management company, I think it's foolish. I think it's silly. I think you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Now, I don't know, Todd, if you have a brokerage that you sell homes.
We'll only use it for our clients. We don't market out.
Same. Okay. So right now, I don't mind sharing this. We do between $250,000 and $500,000 in transaction commissions per year. So, do you ever take finance? I know you're an econ major. Did you
I took economics and finance. Yeah.
Okay, finance. Okay, so finance 101. If you calculate the net present value using a discounted cash flow model, net present value of the revenue stream that is your client's account, your client's property, right? And so why is this important? Because if we're going to understand our businesses, we need to understand what our max CAC is, max client acquisition costs. So doing an analysis where we look at every single property as an annuity, and we understand what our direct costs are, we understand what our overhead component is, we understand what each new account contributes to gross margin and net income. Gross margin is extremely important to understand, in my opinion. So if we do these things and we run an analysis, for instance, and we identify that, okay, my average client stays 5 years, there's a 20% probability they're going to list and sell their home with me. That, and my profit margin on that is 70% of 10 grand. That's $7,000 payday at the end, right? And then if you look at the revenue stream, the first year I'm making zero profit. Every year after that I'm making $1,300 profit, right? So that's $5,200, but I use it 20%. discount rate, and I analyze this. What you're going to do is you're going to yield what your max CAC should be, right? It always baffled me in economics why the models showed that profit at equilibrium was zero. I'm like, why would anybody be in business if profit at equilibrium is zero? And the idea is that there's an appropriate or a market sort of generated ROI on capital, and once that's allocated for, there's no surplus in a mature industry in a mature market, right? And don't tell it to property managers, because that's the reality, right? We're in a commoditized service business, and we're just all trying to differentiate ourselves and figure out how to squeeze out extra margin. But okay, where am I going with this? The point is, if churn, there's a subset of churn that actually yields a transaction event with that payoff. Mm-hmm. That is the absolute best case scenario for a property management company. In fact, guess what? If you run that discounted cash flow analysis model and you get the net present value of any account, and you bring that transaction event as close as you can to the present, your net present value of the accounts goes up.
Yeah, let me because a lot of people out there probably did not take finance in college.
Yes.
So let me see if I can clarify this for people. When Mark's talking about a discount rate there, what he's basically saying is every year you look out in the future, the present value of the money you're going to earn in that year is less valuable. And basically the reason for that is I can put that money into something that's completely passive, almost risk-free, and I could let the money sit there, or I can put it into my business or into a stock, whatever it may be. So I have to figure out, is this worthwhile for me if I look out into the future to do this? So what Mark's basically saying is, the money we're going to make on the property management agreement, once it gets out so far in the future, it's so discounted that it doesn't mean as much as a sale that you could get done in, let's say, I don't know, 7 years. I haven't done the math to figure out where the right point is, but there's some point where if you sell the property and get a commission, it's actually far more valuable for you net present value today than it would be if you maintained property management on that property for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
Because all that money out in those later years is basically not worth much to you right now.
Yeah. So I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to restate it another way. If you look at every single client account as an annuity to your business, that you are buying that annuity today at a fixed amount of money, that's your client acquisition cost, right?
Yep.
And then it starts paying you back in increments. To make the example easy, let's assume you're getting a lump sum payment, or you're getting a payment every year, okay? Because that's easier to run the model. And then at some future point, you have a certain probability of a lump sum payout. That's the commission event of selling that property. And that gets discounted back to today's present value of cash. That affects how much you would be willing to pay for that annuity. Okay. So the answer is, you said, well, if you calculate how far off in the future, I have the answer for you. The answer is today. If you sold that property today, instead of managing it a single month, you would have the absolute maximum net present value of that annuity.
I think that's only true. Well, that's going to depend on what your profitability actually is on your property management business. Because if I'm bringing in a massive amount of profit that's close to a sales commission every year, that number is going to change.
Run the model, show it to me. I think you'll be shocked.
Like that actually.
Yeah, the numbers would have to be so small on your commission, and the profitability so high on your revenue stream. Todd, the first time I ran this model, I was very dismayed because I thought I was going into business to manage rental properties with recurring revenue, and I realized I was a transaction business building trust through management. It was astonishing, right? A total reframe for me, and I was really kind of pissed off actually when I did this. So, but back to the argument around churn, if we're going to look at churn in a meaningful way, the point I'm trying to make is you would completely remove those cases, because you wouldn't look at that as bad churn.
Yep.
right? You would have to segment like what churn was like, these are terrible clients and they're a threat to my, like the well-being of my employees and they're not profitable and they're a threat to my brand, reputation. Like that's really good churn. The people that stop management services because they sell with me is fantastic churn. So now what's left over? And what are the factors that are causing that sort of leftover churn? And I can't help but wonder, Todd, if one of the most important factors there is the skill level with which property managers have important conversations with clients. And we might disagree about this, but you might take the position that, well, no, there's just some scumbag owners and there's some supportive owners. And the faster you figure out who's in what bucket and you just address it, then you're better off. I'm of the camp that maybe you're going to say that I'm paternalistic and arrogant and condescending. I'm of the opinion that there are certain landlords that could be educated, that could develop what I'm going to classify as leadership capability. Why do I call leadership capability? Because a business owner is more effective in their way of thinking and decision making when they become a better leader. Like I've gone through a tremendous journey of leadership development and it's changed my thinking. I empower people instead of being a bottleneck. I think of cost instead of financial terms, opportunity cost. Like there's all these mindsets. I think long-term instead of short-term. Like I understand the value of relationship. I understand that I don't burn vendors with 3 bids for stuff that costs $350. Like there's all these things that most of our clients don't understand about thinking like a business owner. And they certainly don't understand how to think about empowering a business manager running their business for them. And I can't help but wonder if some of our churn would drop if we could be more skilled in the way we have conversations that move our clients along this leadership journey path.
I would just say, think about how hard that path has been for you and how long that has taken. And not just for you. I'm not trying to single you out, but any of us who owns a business or any of us.
What are you saying about me, Todd?
Anybody who's been in any sort of leadership position. I mean, that is a tough path to go down to try to let's you got 500 owners, let's say.
So you got a fixed mindset on this.
What's that?
So you've got a fixed mindset on this. Like they're either supportive, they're either thinking the right way, or they're not.
No, I wouldn't say it's a fixed mindset. I would say that there's probably a small sliver of owners that you'd be able to do this with. And I think that most of them probably not, and it's very difficult to figure out which one it's going to work with and which one it isn't. And it's probably not the best use of resources. I always remind people, it is relatively cheap to acquire a door in this business. I pay my BDM about $500, I believe, $550 per door that's brought on. And when I factor in what it costs me in advertising, I'm probably spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $900 to $1,100.
That's cheap. That's cheap. I think a lot of people are spending more than that.
But the average is $1,500 or $16. It's right in there if you look at the benchmarking report.
Yeah.
But if you're collecting, as I always tell people that they should be, $300 and some a door per month, that's cheap. It's dirt cheap money, especially if you've got a decent profit margin. If you're generating more than 20-25% in margin, there's no reason not to put your resources there because it's just so easy. I can turn on the spigot with a flip of a switch in Geek or in All Property Management or in so many other places where I can just turn on the lead flow and I can get the doors added, and it's easy as can be. What you're talking about is certainly something you could do, but I think it's super resource intensive. I think it's super difficult, super time intensive, and I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah. So I wonder about that. And so my pushback, and I know there's some counters to this argument already, but my pushback on that is I remember when I was the BDM and the property manager and the primary point of contact, my conversion rate of, and one of the most important, probably the most important conversion rate, second to converting a client, from a prospect into a client, is converting someone into like, hey, you're going to sell my property someday. It's a massive difference in the profitability of that account. Like we're talking, moving from a net lifetime income of like 3,000 for the account to 10,000. Like it's like a 3x at least, in my opinion, in my experience. So when I was in the role of having daily or ongoing regular interactions with clients, I know that we would convert people at a much higher rate to having enough trust and confidence in us that we would sell their property someday. Now that I'm out of those roles, our conversion rate has dropped. I don't have the data. You know me, I don't like data. I mean, I like data. I just don't like spending the time to get the data. But so that's why I can't help but wonder I'm not saying if it's smart to invest in skill training and leadership development or training. Not whether it's smart to invest in training for property manager professionals. It's how much investment in training. And usually, I think you would agree with me, usually businesses underinvest in training.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like I think I read somewhere, somebody wrote up, said, hey, if a manager spent 12 hours or 15 or 20 hours developing and administering a training program for middle managers or for frontline employees or for 12 people on his team, and they each got 1% more efficient, the ROI was massive. It was like 20 to 50% ROI. It was huge. And so I wonder, I'm just going to go back to that 11% churn to 10% churn. If that's good, if that's preserving good clients, has nothing to do with selling their properties, like moving those arguments aside, if you could really move the needle on that and generate 100,000 per year additional profit, and if by investing, let's say 10 grand a year in like really high skilled training for property managers could get you that 1% difference, hypothetically, would that be a great investment? Absolutely. Is it worth testing? I think it is. But who's offering that level of training in the industry?
Nobody. I mean, here's the reality. Most property managers have no training programs at all. That's the truth. Because
is this an opportunity? Should someone like move into this vacuum and create a program, a training program, a master class for property managers?
Well, here's the problem with that, though, is every PM company is so different. And, there are companies out there. I mean, I can think of a few off the top of my head who have training programs. The problem is they're so generic because they have to be. And every property management company is so unique. If I were to train someone on things like, just client retention and what you're willing to do to retain a client and what steps you need to take to do that, my answers on that are going to be completely different than yours. So, if there's a single training program on those sorts of things, it's not going to apply to every property management company. All of them have different priorities. All of them have different core values. All of that stuff is going to be so different. So it's really tough to have like a bundled training program. And you can do it for things like fair housing and PM basics and that kind of stuff. But when it gets into some of what we're talking about, the things that are really going to move the needle, I don't think you can outsource that to someone who's developed a program. I think you have to do that internally to make it fit with your core values and your policies and procedures.
That's a valid argument, but I can't help but wonder if part of that is wrong. Okay, I'm going to go back to my thesis that every landlord is unintentionally on a path of leadership. They are on a path of leadership. And what I heard you say earlier is you can't really move that needle. It's hard. It takes years. Think about how hard that was for you, Mark. Like, okay, but it's not an on or off switch. It's not 100% or zero. Like if we can help a client think, well, actually, let me back up. Even if we don't change the way they think, if we can change the way we behave when we interact with them, and have, I'm going to break it down like this. This is the poke holes in this. This is the conversation. This is the pattern of this is the subtext of every conversation when a landlord calls their property manager. Ring, ring. Hi, property manager. Yeah. Are you still smart enough, and do you give two shits about me enough to like actually still deserve my trust? That's the subtext of every conversation. Every live phone call has that subtext.
Yeah.
Okay. So what does the property manager do? And by the way, this could be trained, and this conversation is invaluable. I'm sorry, Mom, for swearing if you're watching this. If you know what the property manager usually says? Well, gee, I don't know. What is it you want me to do? Okay, you're laughing because you know this happens thousands of times a day across hundreds of thousands of relationships.
Of course.
The subtext of the conversation really, really, really is, are you smart enough and do you care enough and do you have the capacity to warrant my continued trust? That's why I'm calling you. And guess what? I'm going to say all kinds of maybe moderately aggressive micromanaging things to test my underlying question. And you know what the property manager does 9 out of 10 times? 9 out of 10 times. And this is why they go home with a chip on their shoulder and they drink too much. Because, I mean, what's the saying that we all know? The property manager is the punching bag for the owner and the resident.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because we don't know how to have the conversations in the right way. We don't know how to show up for ourselves and have strong, healthy boundaries. That's why. And so, okay, so here's the subtext of the conversation, the response back from the property manager. This is what they should say. Yes, and I don't need to talk with you right now. I do care a lot, and I'm very smart, and I will call you when I'm out of the fray. And if you want to like dissect this because that's important for your confidence in me, we'll do that. But right now, you're going to support me. Let me do my thing. Thanks. Those are not the words they say, but that should be the communication. Because what happens every day at scale is property managers, nice, caregiving, well-intended property managers, servant heart property managers are handing over the locus of authority and control and confidence to the owner when the owner swoops in aggressively.
No, I agree with that completely.
It's an abusive relationship dynamic. You have to break that cycle.
There's not any of that I disagree with on principle. I just think that what you're talking about accomplishing there is something that takes a degree of confidence and experience that someone like you has, because you're the owner of the business. Someone like me, someone, like a Mark Cunningham, they can have those conversations and they can present that sort of confidence and they can bring the owner along. I remember, when we used to work in the office instead of working remotely, I would have conversations with owners. This is going back 10 years ago when I used to do that sort of thing. And the receptionist out front would say, "Oh, you're so good at talking them off the ledge when they're so mad." And I'm like, well, yeah, that's just because I've been doing it a while. And I know everything that's going on with the property and all this kind of stuff. But it's very difficult to get a rank and file employee to the point to be able to have that kind of confidence.
Nope. You're going to like either or, 100, 0, black, white. Like that doesn't matter, Todd. It doesn't matter that they arrive at some arbitrary level where suddenly that's unlocked. It's a spectrum. I'm arguing this is a spectrum, and I'm arguing that the right investment in moving property managers along that continuum could have huge returns.
That's where the disagreement is, because that's where I'm not sure the right resource investment is. I just don't know that that's the best place for your resources, your money, and your time.
Because you think it'll take a huge resource cost and a limited return. That's what you're saying.
It might even bring a significant return, but I think the resource cost and everything on it is inordinately high as compared to the relative ease of biz dev and marketing and systemization and other things that are so easy to do. And what you're talking about is so difficult to do. Even acknowledging it's on a spectrum, it's not black and white, but moving people just a little bit on that spectrum is very, very difficult. And it takes a lot of experience.
What data or experience do you have that tells you that that's so difficult?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I don't have data in front of me that deals with
Woohoo!
that.
Just defeated Todd with his own argument.
Yeah, I mean, I would. That's something I'd like to research actually to see, and I don't know.
What if there's no data out there? What if you can't research this? What if you just have to like run an experiment? Like,
oh, then I will not be the one to run that experiment. I'll let you run that one and learn from your mistakes on that one, Mark. I'll keep dumping money into other stuff, but that's what I worry about, is that I don't know that that's the best use of our time to do that sort of thing. And the other thing on that is a lot of these conversations that you're talking about in a lot of places in the country can only be done by a licensee. You can't have really deep conversations about a lot of things with owners or with tenants in a lot of states in the country if you're not a real estate licensee.
Yeah, I know that. I'm in Arizona. Yep.
Oh yeah, you guys really have it bad there.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
My perspective is I can save 60-70% on my labor costs by not using those people. So I don't want to have a bunch of real estate licensees in my office that I have to pay $80,000 because they're top tier people that can have those conversations. I want the person in Mexico who I can pay $30,000, and overall that's going to yield me a far bigger return than just reducing my churn by a few percent. So all that stuff has to be factored in.
Well, hold on. If you can reduce your churn a few percent, I just did an analysis where reducing your churn by 1% generated 330,000. Like, what are we talking about here? You think you can have more impact by hiring a remote assistant than 330,000 additional revenue?
The average property management company spends 40 to 50% of their revenue on labor cost.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's enormous, the difference there, because I have no licensees basically. Everything is done by offshore labor except for PDM.
Yeah, we're not matching up arguments here. Like you just jumped to like, 30 to 50% labor costs, but I'm not, I don't think these have to be mutually exclusive. Like I acknowledge that businesses need to make choices about where they're going to invest. That's why you have Finance 101. That's why you talk about net present value, because you're making educated guesses about the probabilities of payoffs according to, over time for certain resource allocation. But so help me understand your argument, because we're not talking about whether or not you have an efficient allocation of labor. Oh, I guess you are, because you're saying that if you have to pay $80,000 for a job that you could hire two $30,000 people to do, but they're lower skilled and they can't have these crucial conversations, then you're just not going to want to make that payroll. It's not just, okay, your argument is it's not just a $10,000 outsourced masterclass program that's the investment. It's also paying a lot more for the staff that could deliver this level of communication.
Definitely. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because that.
But I'm going to argue, so if you don't have, by your own acknowledgement, you don't have the staff level that can have that level of conversation, are you really providing a valuable service, or are you just sort of only ending up with the clients that will accept subpar communication and service?
Well, first thing I would say there is subpar is very subjective. I mean, you're assuming that every owner wants that kind of experience. And, here's what we found. Because, we onboarded with Blanket nearly 2 years ago because we were a beta tester on Blanket's platform.
Yep.
And we have fought tooth and nail to get owners to do Zoom calls, to do phone calls, to do anything at all, to talk to them and have conversations. And they just don't want it. They just get back. We say, we don't care. Just send me my statement. I just want to know I got my money. That's all they want. And that's the thing about this is you're making an assumption about that the owner wants to be a leader, that the owner wants to have a real business. And I wrote about this in my Substack maybe a month or two ago. A whole lot of owners who are accidental landlords, they just don't give a damn. They just own a property. They, maybe, like for us, we got a client in Okinawa, for example. He's in the Navy. He's stationed out in Okinawa. He doesn't care one bit what amount of money as long as he isn't having to fork over a bunch of money for that property all the time. He just wants it to sit there. He just wants it to be safe. So in 10 years, when he retires, he comes back and he moves back into his house. That's literally the only thing that matters to him. All of this stuff about rate of return, about, people talk about 1031 exchanges. None of this matters to him whatsoever. And that is probably somewhere around 70 or 80% of our clients. And, that is a huge portion of the property management population out there. When you get outside of investment markets like Cleveland and Indianapolis and those kind of places, there's just not a whole big market out there of people who want to be the kind of client that you're talking about, I don't think.
Well, you're assuming that the only client that would benefit from these higher level conversations, adjusting their thinking to think more like an investor and a business owner, you're assuming that only an investor would benefit from that.
No, I'm saying we have tried to have these conversations and they say, no, we're not interested.
Oh, hard
That's
pause for
real data.
Pause for a second. That's like a proactive outreach, asset management, real estate investment advisor type outreach. And they're saying don't bother me. I've got other things. But we know that there's a steady inflow of conversations happening. And that's what I'm talking about. The steady inflow of conversations that are happening where people are pissed and they're swooping into micromanage and they're more likely to churn unless that conversation is handled well. And that happens all the time. That happens every day. Those conversations are important.
Yeah, I agree those conversations are important. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I question whether, again, I get back to the return on investment there, whether having the people in place that can do that is going to be financially beneficial in those cases. And I also question whether the owner even wants to have those kind of conversations. A lot of times the reason that conversation is happening is just because they want to vent. That's really all it is.
Because they want to what?
They want to vent. They want to scream and holler because they're frustrated. They've got a property that's the HVAC system died. They have to spend $8,000 and you're just going to be their punching bag because that's going to make them feel better. They don't want a conversation where they learn something or they become a better leader. They just want to vent. That's human nature. I mean, that's psychology. So, I mean, I think, obviously both of us are making a bunch of assumptions here, but I do think you're assuming that everyone wants this and it's going to benefit from it and it would make a difference for them. And I really don't think that's the case in a whole lot of these owners.
I think we should talk about that next.
Yeah.
I think we should talk about this idea that in order for something to be valuable, someone has to recognize it as valuable and want it, right? Because you and I think, see this differently. This is where that paternalistic arrogance.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of telling people that I know what's best for them. That's not good for me. I tend to want to give people what they're looking for, and I have a real problem with it as both a consumer and a business. I don't like it if someone comes to me with that energy. If I'm dealing with a business and they try to tell me what they think is in my best interest, I am almost certainly not going to do business with that person.
Okay, so why is it okay for the government to do that, but not well-meaning private enterprise
to do that?
Really? Well, that's what the government does all the time.
Well, I mean, yes, of course, but I'm not in favor of those things. That's.
So you're not in favor of regulation in the residential property management industry?
I think we've got a lot of over-regulation on a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, there are some key things that I think are a necessity, but most of that is to protect residents, not to protect owners.
Sure. Like legislators and regulators in Portland, San Diego, LA, New York,
it's all crazy.
Yeah. Well, they are doing what? They are deciding what is right and healthy for tenants. Mm-hmm. And why would they do that, Todd? Because maybe they're paternalistic and arrogant and big brotherish, and in their infinite wisdom, they've chosen. You're a real enigma. You know that you were a former union leader rep. You're definitely a liberal Democrat, right? And yet you are strangely free market when it comes to.
Yeah, I'm left libertarian, so I always have to clarify this for people. Okay. I am not a nanny state kind of guy. I do think government needs to provide certain essential services like Social Security, but I don't think that we need government telling everybody, you're not allowed to go and get a payday cash advance loan because that's not good for you.
How can a former union leader be a libertarian?
Most of the members of our union would probably fall into that category, to be honest with you. I don't know where you see the
Well,
disconnect
like
there.
there's a disconnect because correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, libertarians are very sort of low government regulation and free market. But you think Walmart's really nasty for trying to bust up unions?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's illegal what Walmart does. You got to remember, a union is a democratic organization. So, the members of the union are deciding what the union is doing. It's not where there's a paternalistic group of people that say, "Oh, we know what's best for you, worker. We're going to go out and take care of that." It's the workers are telling the union leaders, "This is what you're going to go do for us," and we just go and execute it.
So it's okay if there's a cohort of employees that represent a monopoly of labor against a company, but not the other way.
Explain that.
Well, and maybe we're getting too far off track. I mean, nobody cares about that. but okay. So are you in favor of companies that a union has organized the labor that works for that organization, but the company, what did they call them back in the early like 1900s? Scabs. They would just go out and like fire everybody and hire a bunch of new people.
Oh yeah, I carry a list of scabs from the airline industry. Yes, absolutely.
Scabs are the employees that come in and take union jobs. Is that what they are?
Correct. Yeah,
And you've blacklisted these people.
Oh yeah, like I said, I carry a list of them. They were not allowed on our airplanes. If they tried to get a free ride, we would make sure they didn't get hired. Absolutely. That's
okay. So that is monopolistic behavior. That is trying to corner the labor market against employers to maintain leverage.
No, you're missing the fact that when labor has the right to strike, management has the right to lock out employees. So it's a balanced force. So management is able to get rid of the employees and bring in replacements, and that's happened over and over again throughout history. So
there is
a balance.
Yeah.
Those are scabs, and we can say that we don't like them and we hate them, but they still have a job. So I mean, labor management still has the ability to go out and replace that labor. So there's a balanced force there. It's not that there's some sort of monopoly on labor. In the United States, it's actually illegal to have what's called a closed shop. You can't have it where you have to be a member of a labor union to be employed. So no, I mean, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about how labor unions work, but labor unions are not a paternalistic thing. And, I don't favor paternalistic government regulation. So, the reason I am left leaning has nothing to do with that kind of stuff. My left leaning stuff is more about, a fair distribution of resources, fair taxation, that kind of stuff. I am not a nanny state, look out for everybody because we know what's best for you kind of guy.
Interesting. Well, I think we should talk more about that in a future episode, but I think we're coming up on time.
We've got some questions here. Next time, I think we should start off. Also, I'd like to talk about this. Ross dropped this in here about talking about growth strategies and that kind of stuff. So I'd love to talk about that with you next time too.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll add those things to the list. We'll be back here maybe later this month, next month, something like that. But hope everybody enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time because my dad's ready to eat for dinner.
Yeah, I will see you in a couple days in where?
Birmingham.
See you in Birmingham.
All right. See everybody later.